Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the River Falls Public Library. This is our Winter Wellness Program series. Tonight we have Stephanie Larson. Stephanie is a psychotherapist, and she is going to discuss with us some tools to use for ourselves and for others when processing grief, all kinds of grief. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie to introduce herself and her experience, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for being here. So, who thought that, like, in winter of 2024, you'd be signing up or going to a grief talk at a library? But thanks for being here. It's really I'm pretty passionate about this topic. Um, as Alice mentioned, I'm a therapist and I do a lot of grief work, a lot of trauma work with folks, adjustment, caregiver fatigue, and a lot of interpersonal relationship work. But that's not the only reason that this topic is important to me. I come into this work with a lot of life experience and a lot of loss. There's some people out here in the audience tonight who are part of my tribe. I'll be talking about that a little bit tonight, too. So I'm just honored that you're here and willing to learn or share about grief. So we will just kind of work through it. I'm a long talker, so I'm going to try to be mindful of the time. And we'll leave some space at the end for um, questions, discussion. We'll be mildly interactive. By that, I mean I might ask you to raise your hands. It's not, you don't have to get up and do like a choreographed dance or anything. Welcome, come on in. So, I did tell you a little bit about me. Some other things, I am a native, born and raised here in River Falls. It's nice to be talking in the community. Haven't lived in River Falls for about maybe almost 25 years now, but I've always lived in St. Croix County. So, a lot of the context of what I'll be talking about culturally tonight will be focused on what we know here in Western Wisconsin. By that, I mean the way we grieve is culturally influenced. Um, and sometimes we can learn a lot about learning from other cultures and communities and the way they grieve. And when I said that, or I put in the description that my talk would be pretty candid, part of that is I think that we as a culture do get some things wrong in grief. So we're going to talk about that tonight too. It's not meant to be a reprimand, it's just a noticing of an area where we can pull together and do a little bit better sometimes. And there's also some ways, especially in this community here in River Falls, that we've seen monumental bonding and really positive support around grief and loss. So, just really want to honor both sides of that. So my why is I came into this work with a hospice and home health background, seeing a lot of patients, clients going through end of life, and working with people who really held and honored death and grief in just the best way possible. And in that work, I was on the administrative side of things at the time. And I was like, nope, that's what I want to do when I'm a big girl. At the time, my kids were needing a little bit more support at home. So going back to school wasn't an option. And then our family went through a gigantic grief wave of multiple losses of very important people. Aunts, their relation to me were aunts, an uncle, my grandparents, and my brother. And through my own grief journey, that reinforced for me why I wanted to do this type of work. So I come into this talk with professional experience, educational background, and probably too much life experience. But guess what? I can guarantee you, if you have not experienced grief, you will. It is part of the normal life cycle. And the better we can hold it, the better we can get through it. So if you would just take a minute with yourself, here's some of the interactive, and just kind of check your body right now and notice what you're feeling, just with even the little bit that I've said this far about grief and loss, and kind of remind yourself why you came here tonight. So, what is your why? My why is that through my own grief experiences and through my professional experiences, I want to continuously better help and support people through grief. Um, so just you don't have to answer out loud. Just think, what is your why? And what are you noticing in yourself right now? Are you noticing any sadness, a little anxiety, complete neutrality, maybe some joy, because those are all parts of it. And if I could just do a quick show of hands, anyone here for professional reasons? Excellent. How about personal? Both? Okay. And personal reasons for yourself? For others? Okay. Thank you. It won't get too much more interactive than that unless you want it to. Okay. So we're just going to gain a better understanding of grief and loss, define types of grief and loss. We like to only think about grief and loss as loss of person, and that's just not the case. Hopefully you'll leave here a little more confident in supporting yourself or others through this. And again, just to normalize grief and loss, that they are part of life. We will face them, and as uncomfortable as it can be, we can make it through. So just some quick definitions here. Loss is the absence of an important person, place, or thing. I think when I first made this, the Webster definition was the fact or process of losing something or someone. And I wanted to point out that loss does not have to be tangible. There's many types of loss that we can't touch, feel, hear, or know. It sometimes is the idea of losing what we thought we would do in our life. Maybe the loss of the picture of the family that we thought we would have, and we don't have it. So just keep that in mind, that loss isn't always a tangible thing. Mourning is the action we do when we're grieving. It's the outward expression of what we're dealing with. It's what we can see with our eyes. And again, mourning applies to all forms of loss, not just loss of person. It's often culturally and spiritually influenced. So that's kind of tying into me saying that a lot of my talks are influenced by what we do here in the Midwest for processing grief. And grief is the emotional experience that is a result of the loss. Defined by Webster, I think it was, again, deep sorrow especially caused by someone's death. And it is typically associated with the loss of person, but we can grieve anything. So if you've ever found yourself feeling like, why do I feel sad about this thing? It's grief. It's normal. It's okay. Don't try to push it away. So common types of grief and loss. I will kind of point out when I feel a little argumentative about some of these descriptors, but I still think they're important. Normal grief is noted as something that typically lasts 6 to 2 years. That's one of those things that I'm like, who says 2 years? I don't know. So it follows social, cultural, and religious norms. Delayed grief has a delayed onset of beyond the loss event. So the thing happens and you don't immediately start to grieve. There's a delay in the process. This happens often when we have multiple losses in a row, when we can sometimes not have the opportunity to hear of a loss. So if we maybe hear 6 months to a year later that someone's had passed, our delayed grief will start after the event happened. Anticipatory grief, the felt sense and process prior to the loss event. One of the biggest areas I work on in this area, or work with people on in this area, is a lot of caregiver anticipatory grief. Those who often are dealing with a form of dementia. We start to lose the person we knew before they actually physically die. And it is said that this is actually more difficult than post-event processing. So I think that's of note. So if anyone in the room has experienced that caregiver fatigue and loss of someone, just really kind of give yourself credit that the research shows that's actually more difficult type of loss than some normal losses. I say normal because what is normal? Ambiguous loss is loss that occurs without closure or clear understanding. A lot of time, this is when someone will pass away and we might be searching for the medical reason of their death. Suicide falls in this category. We aren't able to resolve it, and it leaves those who are bereaved searching for answers. And the last one, disenfranchised grief, is not valued or recognized by others. So, one category I hear kind of often is like when we are grieving the loss of a pet, and other people are like, it's a dog. That's really disenfranchising someone else's grief. There are multiple things that can go in this category. Another commonly disenfranchised form of grief is miscarriage. It happens a lot, especially if it's a really early on in the pregnancy. So, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, if you've heard the name or not, she was a psychiatrist, and she actually studied the process of death and dying in folks, and came up with what she felt were the most common stages of a person goes through when they're dying. And then she took that work and put it into what we believe grief looks like. There are these common stages in grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But this is one of the things I think that we often get wrong in our culture, is that we believe this happens in a timeline, really nice and tidy and clean, just like this. And that's a really, really bad misconception. So loss event happens, you go into denial, then you're angry, then you bargain, then you have some depression, and then you accept it, and oh, it's really nice and pretty, and we have a resolution and the grief is over. And by the way, that happens in 12 months. No. So how many of you have heard someone say like, well, it's been a year and dot. No. So I just really encourage you to challenge yourself tonight to think about the fact that these are pieces of grief, but they are not the only pieces of grief. We all grieve in our own unique ways. Some of us will hit every one of those, some will hit none. And we add other things to this process as well, because we do this in our own way. And I just want, if you could, everyone to erase the 12-month timeline. Also, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did not intend for this, for what she was providing to come out as a neat and tidy thing. It's just something that I'd say accidentally got a little bit wrong. We like to, we kind of live in a, well, we don't kind of, we do, we live in a death phobic society. And I think we kind of like to sterilize it, and it's just not a clean process. It's dirty and it's ugly and it's painful. And that's what it is. So this is what grief actually looks like. It's a mess. And what we need to do is just kind of follow the waves. So as I was going through a lot of the processing in that phase of many grief swells that I spoke of, I don't know where or how. If anyone knows this quote and who it belongs to, I would gladly cite them, but I have no idea. I don't know if I made this up in my sleep. I don't know if my therapist told it to me, but what I had decided at a certain point, and this was a big pivotal moment for me, is I didn't have to get over these losses, but I was going to choose to get through them, however that was going to happen. And this is something I say over and over and over with friends, my clients in therapy, because there's a lot of pressure to just get up, move on, and carry on like before. But the thing is, grief changes us, for better or for worse, hopefully for better. Hopefully for better after tonight's talk. You can get through it. you don't have to get over it. I'd like you all to just kind of take a moment to give yourself that permission to grieve. It's our right and it's necessary. The next stage of grief, this is kind of a new finding. David Kessler worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross a lot on those grief stages, and he himself has been through quite a number of grief swells and was writing this book, Finding Meaning. He believes it's the 6th stage of grief. And at the time, I believe, if I recall the story appropriately, he published this book, Finding Meaning, in 2019 and was set out on the road for promoting his book. And while he was on the road, it was 2020, which we all know was a lovely time with its own forms of grief for all of us and loss. He received a call that his son David had died by overdose. And this book, never more than that time for him, he says, made the most sense to him. But he posits that meaning happens within the griever, not in the event. So if we could be a little bit more explicit about that, is that the way a person dies or what we lose, if it's a loss event, is not what's meaningful. So if someone dies by suicide, that's not where we find meaning. The meaning happens with us and our relationship to the loss event. He doesn't intend for this stage to be a bypass to the pain. He really firmly believes that we need to work through the pain in order to be able to find our meaning. And I obviously am in agreement with that. And that's why I use a lot of his work in my work. Meaning puts a mark on the fact that the loss mattered and the life before the loss mattered. And he believes that this stage of grieving is the most meaningful next to having a compassionate present witness. So first and foremost, our grief needs to be witnessed and acknowledged. And then the most meaningful part of it, he believes, will be when we make meaning of the loss. So in our grief and in our loss, again, whatever type it could be, remembering that loss can even look like a natural disaster, a fire in your home. Again, it's not just about humans, it's just that's the angle I usually am working most with in my work. We would like to really think about circles of support, and that is one of the best ways that we can support ourselves as well as support each other. So in the center of this bullseye here is the loss event and the people closest to that loss event. So if we make this a little less poignant maybe for loss of person, and we think of someone who does maybe lose their home to a fire, which is also a travesty, the people closest to that event are the people who live in that home. But it does have a ripple effect. It's going to expand out to the people around them and who can support them. So kind of knowing where you are on this target, what level you would be on in relation to the loss event is going to help you understand a little bit better how much to allow yourself to either receive in for support, or how you can show up and let the center of the event get the support from you. So again, loss of my brother, I was right there in the center of the target, right? When one of my good friend's grandmothers died, I was out some layers on the circle. I loved her grandmother. She mattered to me very much, but she was much more in the center of the target than I was. So I had more to send in versus what I would need to be receiving if I were in the center. So this is going to be a long list. Let me check my time. Oh, we're good. We're good. Not a completely inclusive list of things you can think about in grief and loss by any means, but just some ideas to think about in how we can show up for each other. So I think just the most important thing that when someone is grieving and you know they're grieving, or when you are grieving, show up. Show up for them or show up for yourself. Be gracious with yourself if you are the person in the loss event, because how we show up for ourselves is not going to look like it did before the loss event. Okay. You're going to have a significant loss event and you're not going to bounce back to normal the next day. So sometimes showing up for yourself looks like, I took a shower today. That's pretty great. Okay. Um, just showing up for another person sometimes looks like, you know what, they're not answering their phone, but I know in that circle of support, I'm pretty close to the middle. Like maybe this is my bestie or something. They're not answering their phone. I'm going to go over there anyway. I'm going to go to the house and knock on the door because I know that's okay. Now, if I'm a couple layers out and it's a coworker I've worked with for maybe a couple of months, I'm probably not going to show up at their door because that's going to feel a little invasive, I think. So we kind of have to know where we are. We have to gauge where we are. So time. Again, I already kind of gave my stance about this 12-month thing. Time will be what it'll be. Allow it to flow, allow it to process, and don't put time frames on things. As a supporter, it is not our job to come in and fix this for people because, newsflash, we can't. It's not our job to fix it. It's just our job to be there and say, do you know what you need? Can I do it for you? Can I do it with you? Should I just sit with you? Do you want me to get out of your face? Because sometimes that's the case. What we like to do here in the Midwest, and I'm a full supporter of this, make a meal, help with a chore, offer childcare. Can I clean your house? What can I do? Do you want me to come do your laundry because you don't feel like getting off the couch today? That's great. One thing I do like to point out on this when I think about meal making is that it's really important to remember there's a phrase that the real heavy parts of grieving start when the last casserole dish goes home. So just remember that as a supporter. That's when all the energy of the planning or the response to the loss event is starting to dissipate. And that's when the real tough work starts for the griever. Call, send a card, a text, just check in. Right? I had a friend who lost their daughter in a car accident. I was probably in the middle to outer layers on the circle of support. And I would text and I wouldn't get a response. And I wasn't upset about that. It's not their job to make sure I'm okay with a response, right? It was just, hey, thinking of you. I'm in town. I'll stop by. No response is just where they're at. Asking a person, what is this like for you? Is a really, really important question. They might not want to answer, but we can ask. They might want to answer tomorrow, but not today. Allow for good days and moments. This is both as the supporters and as the griever. So it's okay in our grief if we have a good moment or a good day. I'll tell you that my family likes to use humor. So do me and my friends for coping. I plan to write a book about it someday. Stay tuned. That's okay, right? That's what gets us through sometimes. It's what we need. Our bodies actually need to get out of the stress hormones and the state of grief once in a while to just come up for air. And don't think that just because you're having a good moment that it means the thing didn't matter, because it did. And grief is a beast, and she'll come back and show her face whenever she wants to. So it'll be back when it's time to take another bite and chew on it and process it. Remind a griever to treat themselves as a best friend. We do a lot of this bargaining stage in grief. If I would have, I should have, could have. No, would you say that to your best friend? You know? So if someone's kind of really having some self-defeating talk, just ask them like, you really could be a lot more fair with yourself. Remember that grief doesn't define a person, it's just something they're going through. So not labeling people is really helpful. I'm not going to go too deep into that. I think you can think of some things where maybe that isn't helpful. Um, don't define the loss for the griever. Don't tell them how they feel. Don't tell them what it meant to them. That's not our job. It's pretty offensive sometimes. Just be a witness. That's all you have to do. Humor, I already referenced. It's good stuff. If you can find it, use it. It's like a wonder drug. Give grievers permission for feedback and or non-response. I just kind of mentioned that a little bit when I was talking about texting a friend, but also ask them, like, do you want me to leave? Am I like up in your business too much? Do I need to go? They should tell you, especially the closer you are in that circle of support. Hopefully, the more honest you can be with each other. Encourage continued connection with the loss. So again, if we're talking about humans, still stay connected with that person. It's okay. We're not crazy if we're talking to the person that's gone. That's what we do, and especially depending on our religious and spiritual beliefs, that is probably very appropriate. But if you find yourself in grief, talking to the person that's gone or the pet that's gone, or even shouting at your house for the house fire that happened, it's okay. You're not losing it. Count your wins. If you can do 3 things in a day that you successfully did again, was it shower? Was it I got out of bed and walked to the bathroom? Or was it I went out with a friend for coffee today? It doesn't matter what it looks like, just count the wins. Normalize that there will be pitfalls in this process. Take breaks, healthy distractions, treat yourself. Again, that is not wrong, that is living. I strongly believe that when we're talking about human loss, the people who love us would want us to keep living. I don't think they want us to be in that pain all the time. Healthy distractions sometimes for some people looks like going back to work. Sometimes that's not what that looks like, okay? If possible, and if it feels right for you, find a cohesive support group or a therapist that you jive with. That's important, a therapist you jive with. I tell all of my new clients, if you don't like me, that's okay. Tell me. You're not going to hurt my feelings, because if that hurts my feelings, I'm in the wrong line of work. This is about you and your needs, not about me. There's some good support groups online too, if people don't wanna do that in person. That's one of I have some thoughts about technology and how sometimes it's moving a little too fast for us, and there's some really great gifts about technology, and one of them is that we can join things that we might not have access to normally. Draw on your faith or spirituality if that's important to you. Lean on your community. I just do River Falls has a great sense of community support. We're all very aware of some tragedies that's happened in this community, and I just would like to give kudos for the community pulling together in times like that. Know where you are in your circles of support and find your 8 tribe. This is actually something I just threw on the slide today. A good friend of mine sent me a clip from a podcast, and they were talking about some research that shows that when a person is in a time of need or needing support, the research says they only need 8 minutes. 8 minutes with someone they trust and love. And so in this podcast, they were talking about knowing who your 8s are and being able to reach out to them and say, "Hey, do you have 8 minutes?" That's your mayday. That's your way of saying, "I need you. I need you now. Can you do it?" Not everyone can drop a hat, but some friends will be stop, drop, and roll. Some family will be stop, drop, and roll, and they'll be there. So I thought that was really great research. 8 minutes. That's all it takes. Remember what's helped you in the past. Again, keeping in mind your role on that circle of support. So not being too invasive with people maybe we don't know intimately, but if it helped you, it's probably going to help somebody else. Writing, storytelling, conversations, these are all really important. Write about your grief and loss, because letting it out shifts the process. It gives your grief a name and validity, and it also helps you recall what was good. When we're in grief, our brains are actually designed to look for threat or danger, and loss is a form of danger. It's what our autonomic nervous system does. Our brain is wired to say, where's the problem? Fix it, get away from it. So writing is one of the best ways, and talking, but writing is one of the best ways to pull those things back into your attention. Writing letters to or from the deceased or about the issue of loss or the source of loss is a great practice. Another thing in writing is to write from someone else's perspective. So, if you think of maybe losing your parent and you're writing from your perspective and what your loss was like and what your parent meant to you, if you can then flip the coin and think about what it was like for your parent to not be with you anymore, and or watch you grieving their loss, that can be a really healing process. And if there's multiple people in the relationship dynamic, writing from all the different perspectives is perfectly fine. It's pretty cathartic process. I just talked about that. Tell stories. This is one of my favorite things. Tell the good stories, tell the bad stories, tell them all. This isn't always something that can happen early on in grief, but through time and through our processing, this is what keeps the important thing in our sight, and keeps, when we're talking about loss of person, it keeps their memories alive for us. Again, learn about others' stories. This is a fun one. I have one memory of when my brother died that I got a letter or a card in the mail, surprisingly, from an old teacher of ours at the high school, and she shared with me a fun story that I would have never known had she not wrote me the card. And essentially it was like, "Hey, remember when your brother failed freshman English because he couldn't see the chalkboard, but he didn't care enough to tell anyone, so he failed the class. And so then as a sophomore, he had to retake freshman English, but he was embarrassed because then he's the only sophomore in the class, right?" So she wrote a very nice story about the fact that they worked out an independent study together, and he could go to the library and he could write about anything he wanted to as long as he got the job done. And so he wrote about hunting and fishing. I would have never known that. It was a really beautiful card to receive. So asking people like, what do you remember about that person? Or what was your favorite thing about that pet we used to have? Again, it's okay to talk with the deceased or write letters to them. In conversations, share how you, as the griever, really feel with someone you trust, someone who can hold that space with you, because how you feel is just how you feel. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just how you feel. And hopefully, if it's an uncomfortable feeling and you share it, it will pass. It's really great to connect with others who have had a similar loss that are outside of the center of the circle or outside of the circles of support, because then we're not both experiencing the loss. When we're all grieving, we're all grieving. If you've met one person grieving, you've met one person grieving. We all do it uniquely. But when we can connect and bond with someone about the type of loss, it's really useful. Books, art, music, social media. Again, a little bit of I'm a little timid about social media because it can be used in the wrong way, but it can be used in some of the best ways, and it can really bond people in ways that we wouldn't have had access to do before, especially with really in particular types of loss that maybe people don't want to talk about, or they're just infrequent, and so we don't have opportunity to find someone to bond with in our own community just because we don't know anyone who's experienced that type of loss. Music's a great one for a lot of people. Lyrics of song and art, forms of art can often express what we aren't able to articulate, verbalize, or things that we don't even have language for. That may resonate with some of you, that there are no words to describe how you feel in loss sometimes. But art and music can do that for us. I think some books are great too. I actually brought some with tonight, so when we're done with the talk here, you can have a peek of them. My very, very favorite one is the first one on the left over here. It's called Tear Soup, and it looks like a children's book, but it really is applicable to all ages. And it's so simply and beautifully put. It can be for anyone, and I think it resonates with children too. It's really difficult sometimes to find content for children to make sense of loss. Daily meditation or interpretation of an event. I actually have a book over here too that has a meditation and I think it is Christian based too, and it has a little bit of scripture influence. And there's one day of the year. So often in sessions with people, they'll come in and maybe say, "Oh, this week was the anniversary of so and so," and we might flip to that date in the book, and I will read it to them, and almost always it resonates and it means something. I can't explain to you why, but it works. So we can do that with and for ourselves and with other people too. No judgment. I'll get into that a little bit. But one of the things that I like to steal from David Kessler is he says, judgment demands punishment. So if you think about that, you're judging someone about how they're grieving. What is that asking? Like, you're doing this wrong? So you should, just really kind of think about that statement. That one's strong for me. If we're in a spouse relationship and have lost a child and we think our spouse is grieving the wrong way, the punishment is going to be that we're not going to be able to support each other or work through our own grief, because all of a sudden we're being told we're doing it wrong. So what is better than judging is being curious. Hey, what are you going through? What are you thinking right now? Do you want to chat? Do you just want to go outside and cut the grass? And here's some of the things we do commonly in our culture on the Thaniversary. Thano is the Greek word for death, so that's a word we can use for the anniversary date of death of someone. Memorial or honor events. I've seen a lot of people do fundraisers. It's fantastic, right? That's part of the meaning making. Why have a fundraiser? Well, to support and to help. And a lot of times the fundraisers will continue on and continue to support something. I think of like Halos that we have that started somewhere, and it's all about child loss. It's a fantastic thing because now that is a form of support in those circles of supports that can come in at a time when the griever has nothing left. Another one I think of is there's a fund in the area. It's called the Cheese Grater Fund, and that was founded by some families who lost family members to suicide, and their mission is to create funds so that people don't have to go without mental health. So they contract with a lot of mental health providers in the River Valley and help underinsured and people with low cash receive therapy. Having an annual gathering if you want, right? This can look like whatever you want. You can actually do this by yourself too, if you just want to take one day a year and just honor the loss event. A lot of times people do a candle ceremony or hold vigil. We've seen a lot of holding vigil in the last few years with some mass events going on. That's really important when communities have shocks to their system. Fire ceremony, if you want to hear more about that, I'm going to just check the time here. Yeah, I'm not going to explain that too much, but if you want to hear more about it, I can chat about it after the talk. It's a Native American ceremony that's quite beautiful, and it is in summary, writing what you're worried about, and some traditional things happen, and you put it in the fire and you give it to the spirits or the gods to help you take care of it. Another pretty cathartic thing. Traveling sounds strange, but a lot of people are now spreading ashes in important places. Maybe those places are where you made memories, or maybe it's where you wished you could have gone together and it didn't happen. Maybe it's meaningful just for you and you want, in essence, a part of that person there with you. Um, or just taking a trip in honor of someone. Why not? And creating new traditions around the loss of someone. So I think about this a lot at the holiday times or birthday times. But maybe if someone's absent, it's like, okay, well, we're gonna make their favorite dessert and we're gonna eat it and we're gonna think about them. Favorite foods and things. And again, completing the things you weren't able to do before the loss and doing that as an honor of the event or the person that's gone. That's a way of continuing to live our lives and still remember and honor them. So these are some things that are potentially destructive. This is, as you see, my big no sign. Um, Comparisons. Well, when I lost my mom, don't, nope. Grief ranking. You have no idea what my loss feels like. Don't do that. Please do not do that. Shaming people for how they feel. Grief halting, which is stop. Why are you crying? Don't do that. All that does is send the signal that our emotions are wrong, they're uncomfortable, and that the people around us cannot hold the space with us. Dismissiveness and ignoring, just like, doesn't matter. Making assumptions about where the person's at. That's not our job. It's our job to ask where they're at. Giving a prescription of this is how you get better. We don't get better. We just get through. And again, being fair with expectations and timelines. I think that's one that we really put on ourselves a lot, expectations and timelines. But just know that these things can cause a lot of trouble. So if at all, just avoid them and be aware. Because honestly, I'm sure I've done one of these before, right? None of us are perfect. We are humans. We are imperfectly perfect or perfectly imperfect. How do you say that? I know there's been times that even now, I'm a person who works on grief with others. I know that there's been times when I didn't show up for someone in the right way. Tonight is about being aware and just getting better at it. So, another little interactive here. If I could have you again kind of get tuned in with yourself a little bit, I'm going to say a couple of things, some of the best and some of the worst here. And I just want you to listen when I say the statement and notice how it feels in your body. Notice what your reaction is. I'm going to get a drink of water. And if you need to, even think about a loss event you've had and how, if someone said these things to you, how it might have felt for you. So the first one being, I wish I had the right words, but just know that I care. At least she lived a long life. Many people die young. My favorite memory of your loved one was when you can just have another child. I'm always just a phone call away. I know exactly how you feel. Hey, listen, I'm usually up early or late if you need anything. She did what she came here to do, and it was her time to go. Be strong. I'm so sorry for your loss. Well, there's a reason for everything. You and your loved one will be in my thoughts and prayers. Aren't you over him yet? He has been dead for quite a while. Be strong. You have to be strong. You need to be strong. Don't cry. Or another thing we can do is just give a hug and say nothing. Anybody have any strong reactions to some of those? Yeah. I think you get the point. We a lot of times we are searching, I think, with really good intention to know what to say to comfort someone, and sometimes it's better to just be there, and not say anything at all, or just say, "I'm sorry," because we're sorry. Um, some of those statements that I just read too, I like to point out that, the griever, the person associated with the loss, might be able to say those, and it's okay. Because it's their grief, it's their loss, and it's their rationalization and their processing. So if someone says, "I'm relieved because they're in heaven now," or "I'm relieved because they're not in pain," that's okay. That's making your own sense of it. But to walk in and tell somebody, "They're in heaven now," there's I gotta pay attention to how we do that. So, I wanna thank you for being here and leave you with this quote from Elizabeth and David. "The reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal, and you will rebuild yourself around the loss that you've suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. Nor should you be the same, and nor would you want to." Thanks, everyone. On that note, we do have some time for discussion or questions if anyone has any. I will be over there by the books. Again, kudos to you for being here. This isn't really a topic that people usually sign up for. So I appreciate you being here. I hope at least one thing resonated and was meaningful. I hope at least one part of this was comforting. And I hope that you also have a takeaway that you might be able to help yourself or help another in a time of loss. And most importantly, that in grief, it feels very alone. And that is because it is our own process that we do have to go through. It's very unique to each of us, but we don't have to be alone. We do have community and we do have support. So know that there's pieces of it that we do have to go through on our own, and there's pieces of it where we need each other. So thanks, everyone. Any